Well, folks, despite weeks and weeks of joy over Kamala Harris, so much joy, so many vibes, endless media coverage of her innate and unbreakable genius, it turns out that this race remains a dead heat. We have just reverted back to Joe Biden, pre-Joe Biden death status in this race. We get to the latest on the poll numbers and lead up to the big debate. First, in just 8 days, our first ever theatrical release, Am I Racist?, hits theaters nationwide. Matt Walsh has infiltrated the left's DEI circus. It is more crazy and absurd than you can possibly imagine. A troll this size must be seen on the big screen. Go to amiracist.com for tickets and showtimes right now. So, as I say, despite weeks and weeks and weeks of glowing media coverage of Kamala Harris avoiding literally all questions except for one 16-minute interval on CNN with Dana Bash, in which she was asked a couple of questions but no serious follow-ups. Well, despite all of that, she is still running a neck-and-neck race with Donald Trump. According to Politico, Vice President Kamala Harris is just barely pulling ahead of former President Donald Trump in the battleground states. That is according to a new CNN SSRS poll released on Wednesday. Harris is slightly above Trump in Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, and Wisconsin, but her slight lead is either within or just barely outside the margin of error. The candidates are tied at 47% in Pennsylvania. Trump leads Harris by 5 points in Arizona. When you look at that Real Clear Politics polling average, which again is not just one poll, it is an average of many polls, it shows momentum for Harris, no question. It shows that she is currently leading in the Real Clear Politics polling average in Nevada, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Georgia, but all of those races are within margin of error. And similarly for President Trump, he is running a little bit ahead in North Carolina and Arizona, and they are tied in Pennsylvania. Literally every single one of those states is within the margin of error at this point in time. Not just that, if you look at Nate Silver's prediction for what's going to happen in this election right now, he has Donald Trump with the upper hand. And the reason for that is because Kamala Harris really got almost no bounce from that Democratic National Convention. She may have hit the high watermark of her campaign, and the big turning point could happen as early as next week on Tuesday when Donald Trump and Kamala Harris finally debate. The rules for that debate have now been set. The mics will be muted. There will be no audience. Now, innately, I think a lot of people thought originally that that sort of rule would hurt Trump because he thrives off the crowd and he likes to throw a punch. But the reality is that a contained Donald Trump is much better for Donald Trump, because it turns out that Donald Trump not appearing to be erratic is the key to him winning at this point. Kamala Harris's entire campaign, Tim Walz's entire campaign, the entire thing is based on the idea that Donald Trump is a crazy man who can't be trusted with power. So if Donald Trump does not appear to be a crazy person in the debate, he is going to be on solid footing. And really, there are only a few things he has to do in that debate to successfully throw Kamala Harris off of her game. The number one thing he has to do is simply mention her record, simply point out her flip-flops. She is a target-rich environment, politically speaking, and she has some real systemic problems in some of the key states. Nate Silver points out over at his website today that while Kamala Harris is up by 3.5 points in the national poll tracker, she has fallen below 50% chance of winning the Electoral College. And some of that is because of Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania was widely perceived as the state that matters the most in the presidential election. How goes Pennsylvania? That's how the election goes. Very hard to imagine a scenario where Donald Trump, for example, wins Pennsylvania, but loses, say, Georgia and North Carolina. And similarly, very hard to see a scenario where Kamala Harris wins Pennsylvania, but loses Michigan and Wisconsin. Pennsylvania is almost certainly the most important state in this election. And the problem, as Nate Silver points out, is that it's been a while since we've seen a poll showing Harris ahead in Pennsylvania, which is the tipping point state more than a third of the time in their model. In fact, they added one post-DNC model showing Pennsylvania as a tie and another showing either a tie or Trump up +1. And as we know, the polls tend to undersample Trump voters because Trump has specific appeal for what are called low propensity voters, people who didn't necessarily vote in the last presidential or midterm election. It's very difficult to model what the electorate looks like when Donald Trump is on the ballot. This is one of the problems with the polling. Now, it's not all purposeful skewing of polls. There's a lot of talk about how the pollsters skew the polls and how they are looking for a particular outcome before they even calculate the final number. That isn't really true. Pollsters do have an interest in trying to be accurate, but they have a really tough time trying to measure the nuclear reactor that is Donald Trump in a campaign. Very, very difficult to measure who is part of the electorate, who is not. Who do you reach? How do you actually construct a model of the electorate? Does it look more like 2016 or does it look more like 2020? For example, these are very difficult questions. Now, again, as Silver points out, all of this could change quickly with one or two high-quality polls showing Harris ahead in the Keystone State. But for now, They show a 17% chance Harris wins the popular vote, but not the Electoral College, which remains a very serious possibility. So again, right now, Kamala Harris does not have this thing secure. Not only does she not have this secure, she did make one giant mistake, and I pointed it out at the time. That was selecting Tim Walz as her vice presidential candidate. Tim Walz is a black hole of suck. He is just a terrible candidate. Tim Walz continues to run from questions. He continues to give off a strange vibe, a weird vibe. Here he was just the other day running from questions.
Governor, what's your administration going to do about lower prices? Can we ask a question, please? What's your policy on the
Tim Walz asked if he's going to answer any policy questions. And that's going to be a big no. That's going to be a big no there from Tim Walz. He's just going to wear a camo hat and pretend that he's a man of the people. Well, Tim Walz, Kamala Harris, they're trying to go incognito all the way up through the election. But did you know that incognito mode on your computer is not enough to hide your browsing history? Check the fine print. All your online activity is still 100% visible to a lot of third parties unless you use ExpressVPN. Even when you're in so-called incognito mode, there are a whole lineup of digital peeping toms who can still see every single website you visit. We're talking about your ISP, the people you pay to give you internet. Then here's your mobile network provider. Yep, the ones behind that hefty phone bill. Don't forget the admins of whatever Wi-Fi network you're on. That could be your school, your boss, even your parents. It's like having Big Brother, his cousins, his entire extended family watching everything you do online. That is why I use ExpressVPN. It reroutes 100% of your traffic through secure encrypted servers, so third parties can't see your browsing history. It's incredibly easy. Just fire up the app, click one button, and you are now protected. The best part, it works on all your devices, phones, laptops, tablets, you name it. Don't just take my word for it. ExpressVPN is rated #1 by top tech reviewers like CNET and The Verge. Protect your online privacy today by visiting expressvpn.com/Ben. That's expressvpn.com/Ben to get 3 extra months for free with my exclusive link, expressvpn.com/Ben, to learn more. Meanwhile, Kamala Harris is also running from questions. She's come up with a new variety of tricks to avoid having to answer questions. So she was walking toward Air Force Two, and somebody asked her, how is the debate prep coming? Pretty innocuous question. Is it Joint Base Andrews? She just keeps on walking. She can't hear. She's got hearing problems, apparently. Like Tim Walz doing a DUI in 1995.
Madam Vice President, how is debate prep going?
But we know that she knows how to do a salute as she walks up those stairs. She is better walking up the stairs than Joe Biden. That I'll say for her. At least this time she's not pretending that she's on a phone call as she avoids questions from the press. So this is a very, very tight race. By the way, the data on Tim Walz being a bad pick is pretty much in. Right now, Tim Walz, remember, she could have picked Josh Shapiro, who's the popular governor of Pennsylvania, and that likely would have tipped over the state in favor of Kamala Harris, or at least provided a significant impetus for that happening. She decided not to pick Josh Shapiro because she was afraid that it would tick off all of the radical Muslims who hate Israel in states like Michigan. And so instead, she picked Tim Walz, who's very close with people like Ilhan Omar. The problem is, of course, she has not only not secured Pennsylvania, it turns out that Walz is not all that popular in the state of Minnesota. Now, she's going to win Minnesota, but there's a brand new KSTP Survey USA poll that shows that she has dropped about 5 points in Minnesota since picking Tim Walz. In fact, the better people know Tim Walz, the less they like him. And this is, I think, the nature of so many Democratic campaigns around the country. So yesterday, I spent the day campaigning with Captain Sam Brown. He is the Republican candidate for the Senate from Nevada. And Sam is truly an American hero. Yesterday was his alive day meaning the day that he should have been killed in Afghanistan 16 years ago. He was in Afghanistan and his vehicle was hit by an IED. It set him on fire, his face on fire. Obviously, you can see the scars, his battle scars. He had to go through 3 years of intensive recovery. Not only is he an American hero for his service, also, he is somebody who believes with a passion in constitutional principles in the United States. These are great candidates. The Republicans, unlike the last go-around, unlike in 2022, when Republicans basically raided the loony bin for candidates, Republicans, in many of these states, they are running some pretty good candidates. Mike Rogers is a good candidate in Michigan. Eric Hovde is a good candidate in Wisconsin. Dave McCormick is an excellent candidate in Pennsylvania. And Sam Brown is an excellent candidate in Nevada. Right now, the polling is showing Sam Brown down to Jackie Rosen, who's kind of a nothing burger of a senator. But those polls are likely to tighten up very much as we near the final stretch of the campaign. one of the things the media have done is they've blacked out all of the excellent Republican candidates, ignored them, ripped them. They've also blacked out the Democratic candidates. The entire media apparatus is rooted in the idea that if you get to know many of the Republicans, you will like those Republicans more. And also, if you get to know many of the Democrats, you will like the Democrats less. So you're not seeing a lot of Jackie Rosen out there. You're also not seeing a lot of Sam Brown out there, because the more you see people like Sam Brown, the more you like people like Sam Brown, the more he's likely to win a race. Here I was interviewing him yesterday. Here he was on the Biden administration.
This administration has had failed foreign policy from day one. I mean, I think we've got to consider our border policy part of foreign policy at this point. And when Joe Biden went into the White House, literally after coming off the steps of the Capitol and started signing executive orders attacking our border policy, that just started a domino of other things. And this Senate, led by Chuck Schumer, along with Jackie Rosen, has had opportunities to step up and stop the normalization of relationships, or the attempt of, with Iran. You know, the literal sending of billions of dollars to Iran, the lifting of sanctions against Iran that has funded more terror than probably anything else over decades. And she wants to talk about how, you know, we need to do more. Again, words alone are meaningless in the face of no action that allows for the massacre of so many people in Israel, the hostage that are still being held, and it goes beyond that to this new coalition that's forming between China, Russia, Iran, North Korea. Our enemies are afoot. They see a weaker United States of America, and we need President Trump back in the White House, and we need a strong Republican Senate to ensure that we regain our footing as the strongest nation in the world and we can lead again.
And what makes Sam Brown a unique candidate, obviously, is his personal story. I mean, you want to talk about an amazing personal story. Democrats are constantly relying on the narrative of the character of the people they select. So they try and whip everybody into a lather about Kamala Harris once supposedly working at a McDonald's and then clawing her way up in politics with no help at all from people like Willie Brown, for example. But Sam Brown, actually, his story is quite amazing. I asked him at an event yesterday in front of boosters about how he met his wife. And it's a pretty moving story.
So as I was intubated, I was wrapped up. I looked like a mummy. I mean, literally from head to toe and unconscious. She was part of the care team that was taking care of me. And so by the time I kind of came to and was able to sort of interact with people around, she was now working in the background. And I had no idea who she was for several months. And when I finally got a chance to meet her, I was just, stunned with her smile. She just exuded enthusiasm and joy. And Ben, I talked about the struggle of recovery. There was only one thing that really kind of broke my heart and made me sad, and I didn't know how I was going to deal with it. And it was the disfigurement of my face. I kind of joke, I've had more surgery than a Kardashian, and I look a lot better now than I did then. But what that translated into was, I thought as a 24-year-old man, now they're 25 by the time, by that point, someone who was watching my professional career go up in smoke, quite literally and figuratively, that I wanted to be a husband one day. I wanted to be a dad one day, and I could not reconcile to myself, if I was being honest and I looked in the mirror, how would anyone see past these scars and love this man? And Amy Brown saw through the scars, and she loved this man.
And it's an inspirational story. He's a terrific candidate. There are a lot of good Republican candidates all across the country. So again, the media are deeply reliant on burying the Republican candidates behind either lies or just ignoring them, and also sort of burying the Democrats, so you never get to know the Democrats. Now, the media, they're excellent at not doing their jobs. In a normal world, they would be fired. But, the media, probably they're not using ZipRecruiter. As you know, folks, we live in a time where we just expect things to happen fast. The internet procures answers to any question instantly. You can touch an app. A car will pick you up within minutes. You can order pretty much anything and have it delivered the next day. So here is a question of the things that are still slow in your life. What else do you wish could happen really fast? Maybe exercise and fitness results. That'd be awesome if you just exercise and everything would be better. Or the DMV. But if you're a business, the thing you cannot afford is not to fill your job openings with the best people quickly. It takes a lot of time to build your business and hire for it. But with ZipRecruiter, the hiring part is way faster. See it for yourself. 4 out of 5 employers who post on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate within day 1. Right now, you can try ZipRecruiter for free at this exclusive web address, ziprecruiter.com/dailywire. Once again, that's ziprecruiter.com/dailywire. We've been using ZipRecruiter here at the Daily Wire for years because we are constantly seeking better employees. In fact, we threaten our current employees with the possibility of being ZipRecruiter. You can do the same. Head on over to ZipRecruiter right now, ziprecruiter.com/dailywire to try it out for free. Meanwhile, President Trump seems to have regained some of his footing in this race. It felt for weeks and weeks as though he had lost that footing because obviously his head was in the Biden race. And then, of course, the Democrats pulled one of the great switcheroos of all time. They took their candidate for whom they had rigged all the primaries. They made sure that no Democrat could run a serious race against senile Joe in the primaries. And then once he had won, and then they realized that he actually was not only senile, but that he was going to demonstrate to the public that he was full-scale senile. At that point, they decided to dump him over in favor of Kamala Harris. So you can imagine why Donald Trump was thrown by that for several weeks. And he's been sort of struggling to find his footing, struggling to figure out attack lines on Kamala Harris. Well, he gave a very good performance last night. He did a town hall event with Sean Hannity on Fox News. And the town hall event was actually pretty good Trump. He finally seems to be digging down into her policy positions because that's the thing he needs to attack. The thing is, Kamala Harris was picked because she's an empty vessel. She was picked because she is a big nothing burger of a candidate. She looks good on TV and she says nice things off a teleprompter. And then when it comes to her actual politics, they are just as poisonous as anything the Democratic Party has ever put forward at the national level. And Trump seems to be finally concentrating on that, as opposed to all the kind of spurious attacks that are not going to do any good. The attacks on her code switching, for example, is not going to do much, or attacks on her intelligence. People can see that and they'll make their own decision about that. Attacking her policy is going to be the thing that Trump really can do and do with alacrity. He did a lot of that last night. Here was President Trump pointing out that if Kamala Harris is in fact elected president of the United States, you will see the biggest tax increases in American history. And he is correct about this because he passed the biggest tax cuts in modern American history.
If you let the Trump tax cuts expire, which she wants to do, she wants to terminate them. If you do that, you will suffer the biggest tax increase in history. There's never been a tax increase like it.
He is correct. He also pointed out her failures on foreign policy, and making her own those failures is going to be the key to his campaign success.
We have things going on in the world right now with Israel and with the Middle East is blowing up. It's blowing up. We have Ukraine and Russia. That would never happen. The whole world was a safe place. That was the question they asked Viktor Orban, who's really considered a very strong. They said he's a strong man. Sometimes you need a strong man. He's a strong man. He's the prime minister of Hungary. And he said, you bring back Trump, everybody. Now, I'm not saying it, but he said it because I'd rather say respect. But he said, everybody was afraid of Trump. You bring him back, you're not going to have any problems. It's all going to go away.
Trump also went after Kamala Harris over her border failures, of course.
They're coming in at levels that nobody's ever seen. They're coming from prisons. They're allowing prisoners to come out of all countries. They had almost 180 countries represented over the last number of months. They're emptying out the sickest people, and they're emptying all into the United States. And you said it better than anybody. More terrorists have come into the United States in the last 3 years than I think probably 50 years. There's never been anything like it.
He is right about all of those things. And he concluded, listen, you don't have to like me, but you do have to understand that if you don't vote for me, what you're going to get is her. That is the best pitch for Trump. It's actually a self-effacing pitch. He says, listen, you don't have to love me. You don't have to believe all the things that I say about myself. What you do have to understand is you know what my presidency looked like, and you know what her presidency would look like.
If she won, you're not going to have any fracking in Pennsylvania. You have 500,000 jobs. Think of that. It's your biggest business. And you get a big majority of your income from fracking. And you have somebody that's not going to allow fracking. She's not going to allow it. You can't take the chance. You have no choice. You've got to vote for me. You've got to vote for me.
And he is right about that. He is. He also sideswiped Tim Walz. There's a bit of a story that came out yesterday when extended members of Tim Walz's family said that they were not going to vote for Tim Walz. They were instead going to vote for Donald Trump. Now, normally I would say that sort of stuff really isn't fair game because who cares? Who cares what the relatives of presidential candidates have to say? But turnabout is in fact fair play. And we've had years of people surfacing every obscure Donald Trump relative to write pieces for The Atlantic about what Uncle Donald was like way back when. So this seems fair game. Here was Donald Trump going after Tim Walz for the fact that his family isn't voting for him.
I was so honored today.
And she wants a path to citizenship.
His brother endorsed me.
I saw that.
And his whole family. I saw the picture. And honestly, it was a very nice looking family. But his brother endorsed me and the whole family endorsed me. I said, who are all the people?
Let me play Kamala.
There's something weird with that guy. He's a weird guy. JD is not weird. He's a solid rock. I happen to be a very solid rock. We're not weird. We're other things perhaps, but we're not weird.
Now that is what Trump is returning to. That's the best that Trump has been in a while, and he showed it last night. Well, it's probably a little bit insulting for Tim Walz that members of his family are not endorsing him. But he is running around the world talking about how he knows how to order a donut. It's an actual thing that he did for the Kamala Harris campaign. He's been ordering donuts, and then he's bragging about it. You know what he could use? Being a little more healthy. And, we all could, because your body needs more than just kale smoothies to operate at its best, which is why I want to tell you about Momentous. I don't believe in sort of fads or gimmicks. I believe in hard work and results. That's exactly what Momentous, creatine, omega-3, and protein deliver. These three supplements support nearly every aspect of foundational health, from aiding cognitive function to reducing muscle and joint inflammation. My good friend and colleague Christine is a triathlete and a mom to a toddler. She's been taking the supplements daily. She's not only crushing it on the Peloton every morning, she is dominating at work as well. It's like a secret weapon for people who want to outwork the competition. Now, in a world of questionable products, Momentous stands out. They work with only the best experts in the business. They use only the highest quality ingredients. What's on the label is what's in the product and nothing else. Straight fact, no nonsense. And here's something that really impresses me. Momentous heavily invests in third-party testing. They hold their products to the standard set by the most demanding organizations in the world, including the NFL and the NBA. If you want to take supplements that are made by and used by the best in the world, go to livemomentous.com/Shapiro or use code Shapiro for 20% off. That's livemomentous.com/Shapiro. Meanwhile, again, Kamala Harris is just running away. She's running away from all questions. She's running away from her own policies, as we'll see in just a moment. She is trotting out Liz Cheney. So Liz Cheney, who you'll recall was the Republican who is on the impeachment committee for Donald Trump over January 6th and all the rest of this sort of stuff, and then who lost her seat to Harriet Hageman in Wyoming. Well, she has now come out and said that she's going to vote for Kamala Harris. She said, I don't believe we have the luxury of writing in candidates' names, particularly in swing states. As a conservative, as someone who believes in and cares about the Constitution, I have thought deeply about this. Because of the danger Donald Trump poses, not only am I not voting for Donald Trump, I'll be voting for Kamala Harris. Now, again, I don't even understand the logic here. So your logic is that in order to preserve conservatism, you need to vote for a person that Liz Cheney called, this is a direct quote from Liz Cheney, August 11th, 2020, quote, a radical liberal who would raise taxes, take away guns and health insurance, and explode the size and power of the federal government. She wants to recreate America in the image of what's happening on the streets of Portland and Seattle. We won't give her the chance. So she went from, she's a radical liberal who's going to destroy the country, to I need to vote for her because Donald Trump is such a grave threat. Again, I get that Liz Cheney doesn't like Donald Trump, obviously. I get that Liz Cheney became sort of the point of the spear for Democrats, coordinating with Democrats on the January 6th committee and all of that. And then she was targeted and she lost her primary in Wyoming. I understand all of those things. Also, you can't turn over the country to a person who has pledged that if she gets a triumvirate, meaning a Democratic presidency, a Democratic Senate, and a Democratic House, she's going to radically rewrite the Constitution of the United States. They're going to eliminate the filibuster in the Senate so as to pack the Supreme Court, so as to add at least 2 states to the United States Senate, presumably both Democrat voting states, Puerto Rico and Washington, D.C., thus rigging the Senate for the foreseeable future in favor of the Democrats. They're talking about changing all of the voting rules through the John Lewis Act, which would essentially make ballot harvesting a thing across the entire nation while cracking down on voter ID. They would radically revise how immigration is done in the United States to the benefit of open borders. I mean, all of these things are right on the table. How you vote for that just because you don't like Donald Trump is beyond me. And again, all this talk about how Donald Trump is a threat to democracy, The big question I have to all the threat to democracy folks is, please explain in detail the threat to democracy. Like, in detail, what is the thing he is going to do that is going to threaten the democracy itself more than all the things I just mentioned that Kamala Harris is absolutely going to attempt if she achieves a triumvirate, and if she doesn't, by executive order as much as humanly possible? Who abused executive power more, Donald Trump or Joe Biden? The answer there is perfectly obvious. Joe Biden used the Occupational Safety and Health Administration in order to try to cram down vaccines on 80 million Americans. And only because people like us, we here at the Daily Wire, actually sued the Biden administration was that stopped. Joe Biden has repeatedly attempted to defy the Supreme Court by simply alleviating student loan debt, by simply waiving it. Joe Biden has used executive power in order to open up the southern border, and then he has attempted to sue states to prevent them from enforcing immigration law. And Joe Biden's abuse of executive power, his DOJ going after his presidential rival, his chief opponent, for jaywalking, it's astonishing. And yet we're supposed to believe that Donald Trump, because he said and did bad things between November and January of 2021, and then there was, in fact, a peaceful transition of power. See, it's called the peaceful transition of power when the transition of power is supposed to happen on January 20th, and then it happens, and the army doesn't intervene, and there's no actual coup. That's what a peaceful transition of power is. Whether or not the former president shows up at the inauguration, or whether he's happy with it or not. So what is that? Also, what is the going theory? Is the going theory here that if Donald Trump were to be reelected in 2024, that he would somehow attempt to stay in office in 2029? Is that really the going theory, that Donald Trump is going to run for a third term illegally in violation of the Constitution? You have to be high on your own supply. But all of this is just excuse making for the fact that people don't like Trump, and excuse making for the fact that Kamala Harris is actually underperforming. It turns out that many of the doubts about Kamala Harris as a candidate, they were not all for naught. They were not all nonsense. A lot of people doubted her ability on the stump. And she's been able to hold it together for, 6 weeks here. But she was able to hold it together for 6 weeks in 2019. People forget that the first few weeks of her campaign were not a total disaster area. It took a few weeks for the shine to wear off. Well, now all of it is beginning to wear. And it's wearing really, really thin, which presumably is why we are now activating Operation Russiagate 2. Yes. It turns out the Russians are interfering in our elections again. Yay. Well, the federal government, it comes after criminals, but it also comes after people who just didn't pay their taxes on time. And that is a thing the feds are doing right now. If you're still struggling with back taxes or unfiled returns, handling it alone can be a huge mistake. It can cost you thousands of dollars. In these challenging times, your best offense is Tax Network USA. With over 14 years of experience, the experts at Tax Network USA have saved clients millions in back taxes. Regardless of the size of your tax issue, their expertise works to your advantage. Tax Network USA offers 3 key services: protection, compliance, and settlement. Upon signing up, Tax Network USA will immediately contact the IRS to secure a protection order, ensuring that aggressive collection activities like garnishments, levies, or property seizures are halted. If you haven't filed in a while, if you need amended returns, or if you're just missing records, Tax Network USA's expert tax preparers will update all your filings to eliminate the risk of IRS enforcement. Then they'll create a settlement strategy to reduce or eliminate your tax debt. The IRS is the largest collection agency on planet Earth. Now that tax season is over, collection season has begun. Tax Network USA can even help with state tax issues as well. For a complimentary consultation, call today 1-800-958-1000 or visit their website at tnusa.com/Shapiro. That's 1-800-958-1000 or visit tnusa.com/Shapiro today. Do not let the IRS take advantage of you. Get the help you need with Tax Network USA. So here's the thing. Nefarious powers try to interfere in American elections. That is just a reality. China has repeatedly attempted to interfere in American elections. We know that Iran is attempting to interfere in the American election. So it's not a surprise that Russia will try to interfere in the American election. The difference is that when China does it, it is not a national news story. When Iran does it, it's pretty much buried. When it's Russia, because the supposition is that the Russians support President Trump for the presidency because he is not a stalwart on Ukraine or something, despite the fact that, by the way, Donald Trump in practice was harsher on Russia than Joe Biden was prior to the invasion of Ukraine. Despite all of that, the basic idea is that Russia is going to intervene in the election in such deep and nefarious ways that you will be deceived. You will be deceived. And again, this feels like them setting up the predicate for a crackdown on social media, for a crackdown on tech companies that allow free speech, for a crackdown on, say, X, or a crackdown on right-wing media. Now, as we will see, there's some right-wing media have opened the door to that, which is really disgusting and terrible. We'll get to that in a moment. But the Biden administration is going to play this to the hilt. Yesterday, the Biden administration prepared to publicly accuse Russia of launching a sustained campaign to influence the 2024 presidential elections using Kremlin-controlled media and online platforms to spread disinformation, according to Mediaite. That accusation was to be part of a broader set of actions expected to be announced on Wednesday, including law enforcement efforts aimed at curbing the alleged Russian operation. Now, this only makes sense in the context of 2020, when you had the American defense and intelligence apparatus warning people like Mark Zuckerberg that they needed to shut down the Hunter Biden story because it might be Russian disinformation. They are setting the groundwork for that right now. If there are bad stories that break about Kamala Harris before the campaign ends, what you are going to see is the Biden administration claim that it's Russian disinformation again. It is a convenient excuse to siphon off any sort of viewership of that information. According to four sources who talked exclusively to CNN, Russian state media outlet RT is a central focus of the U.S. response, with officials viewing it as a key tool in the Kremlin's propaganda machine, with disinformation being funneled through both American and foreign voices. And again, that would not be a particular shock. RT obviously has a vested interest in particular points of view being elevated. The question is, how much real impact is that going to have on the election? Well, the reason the media are covering this up to wazoo is because they are basically saying the only way Donald Trump can win is if the Russians somehow manipulate Americans into voting for him. John Kirby, national security spokesperson, he says the Russians are now using AI to try to manipulate the election.
It's much more sophisticated than what we've seen out of the Russians in the recent past, certainly than what we saw in 2016. Yes, they're using social media, but they're much more pervasive at it. They're creating false persona, using artificial intelligence to help drive content and distribute content. And they're much more resourced and organized, using RT, what was formerly just a propaganda organ for the Kremlin, now has turned into a full covert influence activity with full funding to do this kind of work by funneling resources and organizing editorial content in actual media outlets.
They're going to play this up and play this up and play this up. Now, of course, they're going to ignore the things like, Kathy Hochul's top aide, the governor of New York, her top aide being an actual Chinese spy. They'll ignore that kind of stuff because it doesn't cut in their benefit. They are going to play up Russiagate 2.0 as hard as they can. Yesterday, the Attorney General, Merrick Garland, he announced indictments and seizures of internet domains related to Russian interference in the election.
The Justice Department is seizing 32 internet domains that the Russian government and the Russian-sponsored actors have used to engage in a covert campaign to interfere and influence the outcome of our country's elections.
And meanwhile, NBC's Ryan Riley, he reported that Russia, this is really the narrative they're pushing, Russia is going to be the deciding factor. They are attempting to push Trump into office.
The way this indictment sort of lays out some of the documents that they laid out here, they, of course, redact the names of the actual parties that they're speaking to here. So they're not saying explicitly that Russia is trying to help Republicans, but really that's what the documents are allege here. They say, they say Party B or Party A. They don't identify Republican or Democrat, but if you just read the context of it, it's extremely easy to figure out what we're talking about here and what the U.S. government, the Justice Department, is alleging that Russia was doing really to booster Donald Trump's efforts.
And the reality is that Russia and its ability to interfere through disinformation in the American election is extremely, extremely limited. In just 1 second, we'll get to the third part, which is what is actually happening. What is Russia actually doing? Because it's not as though Russia is doing nothing. Russia is actually doing something, and it says something nefarious about some parts of the right that Russia has been able to actually achieve that. First, if you missed it in the headlines, Matt Walsh pulled off the troll of the century at the 2024 DNC. It is absolutely hilarious. Matt actually strolled through a sea of confused liberals handing out cards for project2025.com, but project2025.com wasn't quite what they thought it was. The highlight, Walsh actually got Don Lemon, yes, you know Don Lemon, to promote project2025.com on camera. So you have to imagine Don's face when he realizes he just gave free publicity to Matt's new movie, Am I Racist? The movie that's about to turn his whole worldview upside down. Speaking of which, Am I Racist hits theaters in 8 days, September 13th. Head on over to amiracist.com for tickets and showtimes. Okay, meanwhile, now it's not as though there is nothing there in terms of Russia's interference in America's informational environment. The big story of the day on the right was the fact that the DOJ has put out an indictment accusing a content company, a conservative content, pseudo-conservative content company out of Tennessee called Tenet Media of taking a bunch of Russian money. The indictment doesn't identify the company by name, but it is clearly Tenet Media. That the people who, the founders of Tenet Media are Lauren Chen and her husband. Lauren, who started off as sort of a mainstream conservative, has moved into some pretty fringy circles of late, hanging out with sort of the Nick Fuentes crowd of the world and mirroring a lot of those perverse worldviews. But people who work for Tenet Media, which of course is a larger media company, include people like Dave Rubin, Benny Johnson, Tim Pool, Lauren Southern, Tyler Hansen, Matt Christensen. Apparently, there are two Russian nationals named Konstantin Kalishnikov and Elena Afanasevya, and they were charged with conspiracy to commit money laundering. They were employed by RT, according to the indictment. And apparently, the indictment alleges the defendants have deployed nearly $10 million laundered through a network of foreign shell entities to covertly fund and direct Tenet Media. Comments from top DOJ and FBI officials sharply denounced the alleged criminal scheme as, quote, covert attempts to sow division and trick Americans into unwittingly consuming foreign propaganda and to illegally manipulating American public opinion by sowing discord and division, by co-opting online commentators, by funneling them nearly $10 million to pump pro-Russia propaganda and disinformation across social media to U.S. audiences. And this, again, is something that happens on the regular. I mean, TikTok is a Chinese-owned app, and they absolutely rig the algorithms in terms of what sort of stuff you see and what sort of stuff you don't. So it's not a shock that Russia was doing this. The bigger shock is that pretty obviously, according to the indictment, Lauren Chen took the cash. And not only did she take the cash, it sounds like she then effectively lied to all of the people who were working for her company by never telling them that she was taking Russian cash. So Tim Pool, again, one of the people who was not named in the indictment, but pretty obviously referred to in the indictment, he said, should these allegations prove true, I, as well as the other personalities and commentators, were deceived. I can't speak for anyone else at the company as to what they do or what they are. Another statement was put out by Benny Johnson. He said, a year ago, a media startup pitched my company to provide content as an independent contractor. Our lawyers negotiated a standard arm's length deal, which was later terminated. We were disturbed by the allegations in today's indictment, which make clear that me and other influencers were victims in this alleged scheme. My lawyers will handle anyone who states or suggests otherwise. So it appears that many of sort of these popular media commentators, including some with whom I'm friendly, that they were not aware that money was being passed from Russia to Lauren Chen and company. Now, there's great irony to Lauren Chen taking foreign cash on all this because she has accused pretty much everyone she disagrees with of being a foreign agent, particularly anybody who's pro-Israel. Anybody who's pro-Israel, Lauren Chen suggests is on the payroll of the Israeli government or is doing something deeply corrupt because of Jewish money or because of AIPAC, or AIPAC is a foreign front. So while accusing everybody else of actually being in the pay of foreign parties, it sounds like Lauren allegedly was in the pay of foreign parties, which does speak to something that is, in fact, somewhat perverse that has risen on the right. And that is a generalized warmth toward Russia, toward Vladimir Putin. This obviously has been, I think, a fringe of the right. I do not think this is the mainstream of the right. I think there are a lot of good reasons to doubt the American strategy with regard to Ukraine. Now, since early on in the Ukraine war, I've been suggesting the sort of Henry Kissinger idea, which is you have to fund Ukraine sufficient to prevent them from being overrun by the Russians and then seek an off-ramp. That seems to be the reasonable solution that everybody has come to except for the Biden administration. With that said, the warmth toward Vladimir Putin that has been evidenced by people like, say, Lauren Chen is bizarre in the extreme. It is bizarre in the extreme. Vladimir Putin is not a friend to the United States. He does not share priorities with the United States, pretty obviously. Again, that's not a geopolitical argument about what exactly your position should be with regard to American involvement in the war in Ukraine. It is a simple fact. Vladimir Putin is a murderer. Vladimir Putin is a tyrant. Vladimir Putin is a dictator. And he does not have America's best interests at heart or anything like overlapping interests with the United States. The fact that he has found fertile ground with a particular wing of the right in the United States says something pretty negative about that segment of the right in the United States. And so that's the underlying message. But the generalized attempt by the Biden administration or by a media that is very, very hot on this story to suggest that Russian interference is going to decide the election or that a huge base of Trump support is coming from Russian election interference, that's absolute nonsense. That's trash. Even the amount of money they're talking about here, $10 million being spent on YouTube videos, presumably being put out or promoted by Tenet Media, that ain't going to do it. It really is not. In the same way that in 2016, it was not going to make a huge difference. There were a bunch of pretty badly put together Facebook pages that were telling grandma that voting day was the wrong day or something. The reality is that the opposition to Kamala Harris is driven by the fact that Joe Biden's an unpopular president and she's a terrible candidate. Support for President Trump is the same as it ever was. It is driven by personal like for Trump. And also a reality for people like me, which is that his first presidency had a lot of really good policy attached to it. Speaking of which, Kamala Harris, if she loses, a lot of that is going to be because of Joe Biden's policies. The biggest problem she has is that it is very difficult for her to disconnect from Joe Biden's policies. This is a point made amazingly enough by CNN's Aaron Burnett. Here she was saying, she keeps trying to shift her policies, but she is the vice president of the United States.
People want change. And obviously, I understand the change that Kamala Harris in so many ways just embodies by her existence, right, and who she is. But on policy, she's been the vice president for 3.5 years. How do you make a change argument there? Or does it even matter? I mean, today we were highlighting, that she was going to raise capital gains taxes by slightly less than Joe Biden was going to raise capital gains taxes, as if that was some sort of a massive break in tax policy, right?
I mean, good for Aaron Burnett for pointing out the obvious here. And that is true. Kamala Harris is now saying that she is going to be the candidate who raises capital gains taxes, but slightly less than Joe Biden. Is that going to do it? Is that going to do it? Or is she still the candidate of higher taxes? Everyone knows she's the candidate of higher taxes. Everyone also understands she's doing that in the middle of a slowing economy. According to Axios, the labor market is cooling rapidly, increasing the odds of an aggressive interest rate cut from the Federal Reserve in just 2 weeks. New data out Wednesday morning bolstered that case. Employers slashed the number of job openings in July and fired more workers, according to the Job Opening and Labor Turnover Survey data from the Labor Department. The number of job openings fell by 237,000 in July. That brings the number of openings as a share of total employment down to 4.6% from 4.8%. That is the lowest rate since December 2020. That means that fewer open jobs, more people getting fired. So a seriously slowing labor market at this point. Presumably that's going to be used again as the launching off point for the Federal Reserve lowering the interest rates again. But, if they do that, they do run the risk of reinflating the currency, given the fact that we are not, in fact, at the 2% rate that everyone seeks year on year in terms of the inflation rate. So Kamala Harris looking at raising taxes and regulations in the middle of a not particularly good economy. She's reversing herself on every position, but it's very hard for her to do that. I mean, none of it washes. Kamala Harris changing all of her positions, changing all of her policies. She will make a terrible president. But let me tell you about a great president, and actually about a movie about a great president that you need to see in theaters this week. Reagan. Trust me, the film will make you laugh, cry. It will give an unprecedented look into the life and presidency of one of America's greatest leaders. Dennis Quaid, he turns in like an all-time awesome performance as President Ronald Reagan from basically the time he's 40 till the time that he leaves the presidency. The charm, wit, steely resolve of the Cold Warrior, it's all in there. Penelope Ann Miller is fantastic as Nancy Reagan. Their love story is beautifully portrayed, reminding everybody of a time when dignity and class actually resided in the White House. It's been a while. Here's what really struck me about the film. The eerie parallels to what's going on right now. Inflation spiraling out of control, skyrocketing gas prices, Russian aggression, and more. It's basically the 1980s. They called, and their foreign policy is here again. Seeing how Reagan navigated those challenges and led America to triumph is not just entertaining, it is inspiring. At a time when our country needs strong leadership and inspiration, this movie serves as a poignant reminder of what presidential material looks like. Every time you buy a movie ticket, you're casting a vote with your dollars, so use the opportunity to vote for Reagan one more time. Round up your family, your friends, maybe even that local Young Republicans Club. Go to ReaganMovie.com and grab your tickets today. That's ReaganMovie.com and get tickets today. So yesterday, Kamala Harris put out an ad in which she is literally walking next to Donald Trump's border wall. Remember, she called that thing a medieval contraption, a medieval era contraption. Here she was now putting out an ad walking next to Donald Trump's border wall.
Kamala Harris has spent decades fighting violent crime. As a border state prosecutor, she took on drug cartels and jailed gang members for smuggling weapons and drugs across the border. As vice president, she backed the toughest border control bill in decades. And as president, she will hire thousands more border agents and crack down on fentanyl and human trafficking. Fixing the border is tough. So is Kamala Harris.
I'm Kamala Harris, and I approve this message.
Welcome to the Republican Party, Kamala. I mean, it's just absurd. It's an absurdity, and everybody knows it's an absurdity, particularly because the stats demonstrate that it's an absurdity. The Wall Street Journal has an entire piece out today titled How Immigration Remade the U.S. Labor Force. And what it shows is the insane level of net immigration into the United States. Look at the spike between 2021 and 2024. You're talking about net immigration into the United States in the year 2023 exceeded 3 million. Probably almost 3.5 million. Since the start of 2021, net immigration to the United States has totaled roughly 9.3 million people. That's 3 times the net number of people that entered the country over the prior 4 years. The vast bulk of those people are illegal immigrants. Vast bulk. They try to make this about, generalized immigration. But the truth is that lawful permanent resident numbers, green card holders, have actually been fairly stagnant since the George W. Bush era. That really has not changed in terms of numbers. In fact, it's a little lower under Joe Biden than it was under Barack Obama. Donald Trump lowered it, and then Joe Biden kept it at fairly low levels. When you look at the non-immigrant group, which are temporary workers and student visitors and officials of foreign governments, that non-immigrant group is actually quite small. Very, very small, because a lot of people left the United States. There were changes in status and all the rest. The place where it absolutely exploded is illegal immigration. The illegal immigration numbers are insane under Joe Biden, and everybody knows it. This is not a giant secret. Joe Biden's illegal immigration numbers dwarf the combined entirety of the last 3 administrations. And yet we're somehow supposed to believe that she's tough on the border and she's going to walk alongside that border wall. By the way, she's not even good at walking back her own positions. So apparently, according to Axios, Vice President Kamala Harris's campaign won't say whether she supports requiring automakers to build only electric or hydrogen vehicles by 2035. That was a position she took during her 2020 campaign for president. Harris's campaign has been trying to walk that back, right? Get rid of the EV mandate. Well, the problem is Axios asked Harris to clarify her position because she said, I am no longer in favor of an EV mandate. So Axios asked a pretty obvious question. Okay, let's say you have a Democratic Senate and they pass it. You going to veto it if you're president of the United States? On Tuesday afternoon, Harris's campaign ultimately declined to comment. So she keeps saying that she switched her position, but the real question is going to be, if they simply pass the stuff she wanted in 2019, 2020, is she going to veto any of it? Who believes she's going to veto any of it? You'd have to be insane to believe she's going to veto any of it, because she's not going to veto any of it. And again, if she becomes the president and she has a Democratic Senate and a Democratic House, she's going to change the Supreme Court. In fact, even current members of the Supreme Court, remember, we're only supposed to worry about the politicization of the Supreme Court by the so-called right-wingers on the court. Ketanji Brown Jackson was on The View yesterday, and she literally suggested openly that democracy means that we need to change the Supreme Court.
I guess I think about all of this as democracy at work, public engagement. These ideas of reforms are the kinds of things that have been around since the beginning of our republic. In the book, I mentioned Alexander Hamilton and debating with the anti-federalists over term limits for the Supreme Court. So this is something that has, been around for a long time. As a justice, we try not to participate in those debates, but, it's very interesting to note that this is what democracy calls for.
Well, democracy calls for changes to the Supreme Court. Remember, Liz Cheney, it is only Donald Trump who's a threat to the institutions of the United States. All right, coming up, there was a major school shooting at a Georgia high school. And of course, this means calls for gun control. There's only one problem, as always. We'll get to that momentarily. If you're not a member, become a member. Use code Shapiro at checkout for 2 months free on all annual plans. Click that link in the description and join us.
Republicans are Nazis. You cannot separate yourselves from the bad white people.
Growing up, I never thought much about race. It never really seemed to matter that much, at least not to me.
Am I racist?
I would really appreciate it if you left.
I'm trying to learn. I'm on this journey.
If I'm going to sort this out, I need to go deeper undercover.
They gonna say I'm racist.
Joining us now is Matt, certified DEI expert.
Here's my certification. What you're doing is you're stretching out of your whiteness. This is more for you in this field. Is America inherently racist?
The word inherent is challenging there.
I want to rename the George Washington Monument to the George Floyd Monument.
America is racist to its bones.
So inherently.
Yeah, this country is a piece of
white
folks,
white
trash, white supremacy, white woman, white boy.
Is there a black person around? What's a black person right here? Does he not exist?
They gonna say I'm racist.
Hi, Robin.
Hi, what's your name?
I'm Matt.
Just had to ask who you are because you have to be careful.
Never be too careful.
They gonna say you racist.
Buy your tickets now. In theaters September 13th. Rated PG-13.